All right. I think we're live. Hello out there. If you can hear me, feel free to write in the chat box and say hello and enter any questions you may have. Fantastic. Okay, there's life out there. So I'm Phoebe Lapine, and as you know, I'm here to talk to you today about gluten-free cooking. So just a little bit about my background and how I became acquainted in the art of gluten-free cooking. I've been off gluten for the last 3 years. I don't have celiac disease, but I got off of it in order to manage another autoimmune disease that I have. And it's totally changed my life. For those of you who don't know the stats, only about 1% of the population has celiac disease, but crazily enough, 20% is reporting to eat gluten either all the time or sometimes in their households. So clearly there is an interest out there to start cooking and eating gluten-free for health reasons because it makes people feel better. The one caveat, of course, is that being gluten-free and eating gluten-free doesn't always mean that you're eating healthy. As I've seen some of my guy friends inhale whole trays of cookies just because they're gluten-free, and I try and tell them, you know what, like it's still a full tray of cookies. So really, for health reasons, cooking gluten-free is actually a great way to approach the diet, just because you're avoiding a lot of the store-bought foods that have a lot of other refined things in them. So I would love to talk about various topics today in that realm. I have some notes for various problem areas that I've had to, troubleshoot over the years in the kitchen. But I would love to hear from all of you if there's anything in particular that you want to hear about. It can be as specific as one recipe in particular that you're wondering how to make gluten-free, any particular grains that you want to talk about, flours. I'm open to anything. But I will try and focus this talk in terms of things that are seasonally relevant. And in doing so, I want to talk, hold on. I'm very bad at multitasking, so I'm just warning you right now. Reading your questions while talking is going to be problematic for me. Yes, so you're all reading the chat right now. There are a lot of people who are gluten intolerant, gluten sensitive. There's now this blanket term called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. There's no way to really diagnose it, but a lot of more functional physicians, functional medicine, and nutritionists recommend gluten-free diets for people who have, IBS or other issues, because it is great if you want to eat in an anti-inflammatory kind of way. So if that's you, if that's in your camp, some of these suggestions might not work for you because, of course, white rice flour, corn, a lot of these things are used as replacements in gluten-free cooking, but we can get to that. So yes, the hardest part is what recipes to give patients. So first and foremost, I say I try and cook naturally gluten-free, and that means, again, using as few of those store-bought alternatives as possible and really focusing on anti-inflammatory foods that are naturally gluten-free, being great proteins, vegetables, and all of that. But I also say on my site that I like to focus on healthy comfort food because that's what really people want to eat. So you have to find sometimes alternatives for people's favorite things. This time of year, I find a lot of those naturally gluten-free recipes don't always hit those comfort notes because we want something that's really warming, savory. A lot of chilies and stews have either beer in them or some sort of thickener. And speaking of thickeners in general, a couple that I like to work with at home in place of course, all-purpose flour is white or brown rice flour, which is a great all-purpose flour. I try and keep as few on hand just because so many people who don't have celiac disease don't necessarily have 10 different types of flours. They're maybe dabbling in this type of cooking a few times a week, or just starting to experiment with the lifestyle in general. So we try and keep it as accessible as possible and say just invest in 1 or 2 flours. There's no reason to have jars taking up your entire kitchen because that can easily happen. And of course, all of the singular types of flours, like the white rice flour, chickpea flour, which are two of my favorites, are going to be a bit cheaper than one of those niche all-purpose blends. You can, of course, make your own for that, but I like to use the individual ones and to really keep the number that I have on hand to 5 or so, or at least the ones I recommend. I do a lot of recipe testing, so I have a lot of them on hand, a lot of jars. So for some of the recipes that need that kind of thickening replacement, one big one is the bechamel. So bechamel is butter, flour, and then milk, and it creates that nice thick, creamy consistency that you'll find in a mac and cheese or in a lot of gratins that you see on the Thanksgiving table. So for that, I like to use white rice flour or brown rice flour if you're trying to do a whole grain, or just a regular AP flour. But the white rice is great for that. In terms of thickening stews and soups, it's another great way to do it is just to, at the end of the cooking process, whisk butter and a tablespoon of white rice flour together, just so that it dissolves, and then whisk it into the stew, during the last hour of cooking, and that can help thicken it. Another great thickener for those who aren't avoiding corn in addition to gluten is cornstarch. And cornstarch is actually also one of my go-tos for battering things. I know a lot of the things I'm referring to now are naturally unhealthy, but it's all about finding ways to feed your cravings. And there are, even when you're battering something in cornstarch and deep frying it, healthier ways to do it than usual. Like, I like to do my buffalo cauliflower this way, and at least you're eating cauliflower instead of, buffalo chicken. Does anyone have any specific recipe requests? Okay, I'll just keep rambling then. So one of my biggest, yes, okay. So Somer asks if cornstarch is okay, I assume cornmeal is okay. And yes, so all corn products are gluten-free. Cornmeal is great as one of those go-to gluten-free grains. For instance, that includes polenta, it includes grits, includes a lot of Mexican recipes, of course, anything with corn tortillas like tacos, enchiladas, those are all fair game. That's great. Mexican in general, because of the amount of corn used as a cuisine, is really gluten-free friendly. And of course, yes, you can definitely still be Southern and be gluten-free. Cornbread is actually a rather easy substitution. I have a good recipe for gluten-free cornbread that's just white rice flour and cornmeal. So, like most recipes, actually uses a higher ratio of whatever AP white flour to cornmeal, but because it doesn't necessarily have to be too spongy. Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of argument over how to make the perfect cornbread to begin with, but mine is relatively thin and flat and crispy on the edges is just how I like it, and not too sweet. But there's definitely a camp out there who's going to disagree with my taste in cornbread, depending on what part of the South you're from. But yes, you can definitely do a lot of Southern recipes with cornmeal. Restaurants, it's hard because like fried pickles and fried green tomatoes usually do a mixture of cornmeal and all-purpose flour, but that's something that's really easy to switch up at home. And that's why cooking gluten-free is such a great way to get all of these delicious comfort foods that you crave. Oh, okay, yeah. So it's all about the ratios with baking and gluten-free. I'm just seeing your note about your grandmother's recipe. So maybe take a look at some of the information out there about the recipe ratios for cornbread specifically. I'm not the biggest baker, to be honest, so I'm not able to rattle off those ratios offhand, but I usually come to my favorites and then riff from there. So I have one for cornbread on my site if you want to see it. So we have a question, is rice flour heavier than all-purpose? So actually, here's a fun fact about gluten-free flours. You can't necessarily swap it like for like in baking recipes because they have different densities. But if you weigh the flour, that's an easier way of substituting like as. It may not be, you know, a cup each, but if you weigh it, you can see exactly how much equals what. Sorry, that was a really not articulate way of saying that. But yes, I find that white rice flour is not as fluffy, so it takes up less room than an AP flour. So, and of course, one like general tip for baking is always to aerate your flour. The great bakers out there tell you the proper way to measure is to actually scoop the flour into your measuring cup and then level it off, because you'll get a totally different density in there. If you just dig the cup in, you might get some air bubbles. You might just really be packing it in there. So if you have general problems with your baking, that could be why. With like white rice flour, it doesn't really get that fluffy, so just always try and do the density thing. But yes, in general, like that's the way recipes call for you to measure something. So it's always good to kind of do that little trick. I'm sometimes too lazy, which is why I don't bake. Okay, a question about spelt bread. I used to get this fantastic spelt bread from a bakery in Carborough, North Carolina. While it doesn't include wheat, I found out spelt includes gluten. Is there a difference in the types of gluten in different grains? So gluten is the protein in, you know, in a few of these grains. So it's not really different between them. I believe spelt has a lower percentage of gluten in it. The problem with, the problem is with a lot of the white bread products out there today is that most flour companies, most AP flour companies add extra vital wheat gluten into the mix to make it so that there's a faster rise time. Most traditional breads back in the olden days, you add moisture to the flour along with yeast, and then you wait for the flour to ferment and for the gluten to develop. And gluten is what gives bread that spongy elasticity. So now in our industrial age of making foods, large factories have tried to cut down on that rise time, which, you know, should be at least 15 hours to 24 hours. They're now making bread in less than 3 hours, which is not the way bread was traditionally made. And the reason why they can get away with that is because of higher percentages of gluten in the actual flour and with added vital wheat gluten, which allows the gluten to develop a lot faster without the rise time. So, and, you know, the part of the reason why you need bread is to develop that gluten. So in factories, they're doing it with large mixers instead of that, and the vital wheat gluten helps. So that's what a lot of people talk about in terms of why there's so many more gluten allergies these days. Nothing's really been proven for sure, but it's definitely something to keep in mind in the background. But yes, so people who do show like low-grade gluten sensitivity often don't have as much problem with something like a spelt bread or something that's whole grain, just because, I don't know, I'm actually not sure if there's like no vital wheat gluten added to that, because I do know that there's more vital wheat gluten added to whole wheat bread than there is to white bread. So I can't eat any of it, so I don't have, or cook any of it, so I don't have the specific answers on how it's made. But yes, spelt is not a gluten-free grain, and neither is rye or barley. Quinoa is technically a seed that is gluten-free. Corn, obviously, different crop altogether, gluten-free. Some other ancient grains, amaranth is gluten-free. Farro is not gluten-free. And oats are actually gluten-free if produced in a gluten-free facility. The reason why so many people avoid oats who are gluten sensitive is that, you know, historically, most of the factories that produce it also have wheat products. So when you see gluten-free oats out on the market, it really just means that they're certified gluten-free and produced in a gluten-free facility, not that they're actually any different than regular oats. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, what are good pasta options for gluten-free? I like to make my own. That's awesome. I have a very small kitchen, which you can kind of see in the background, so it's not great for making your own homemade pasta. But I do have several store-bought brands that I really like. I like to choose the ones that have pretty few ingredients in them, again, because you want to avoid a lot of those very refined additives that you can find in a lot of the gluten-free products, which makes them, you know, for some people who, especially who have anti-inflammatory problems, just as problematic. So I like to go with the quinoa pastas because quinoa is very good for you, very high in protein. One of my favorites is Ancient Harvest. That's probably my all-time favorite. Bio Nature makes a great product. It's organic. It's soy, potato, and rice flour. A lot of the quinoa pastas also have rice flour in them. I think Ancient Harvest might be 100%. I'm not sure. Or it might be a mix of quinoa flour and brown rice flour. Also, a lot of the traditional rice noodles that you'll find in Asian cuisine, so pad thai noodles, rice vermicelli, those are all 100% gluten-free. Those Southeast Asian cuisines, because of that, are really gluten-free friendly. I love making my own pad thai at home. I actually just had Vietnamese pho for lunch. Yummy, yummy, yummy for this time of year. But in terms of other options, so soba noodles are traditionally gluten-free, but a lot of brands, because of the way that the texture and the way that they hold up better, have been adding wheat over the years. So you can find certain brands that are 100% buckwheat. You must look for that. Buckwheat is misleading because it's actually gluten-free, even though there's wheat in the name. And I love having buckwheat flour on hand. It's great for baking. It's great for making savory crepes. You literally can just do milk or water, very easy batter to make. And again, it's only one type of flour that you need. So yes, 100% gluten-free, 100% buckwheat soba noodles are a great option, especially for adding to like delicious soups and things in the winter. I love that. Do you work with people who eat different ethnic foods but need to be gluten-free within that? Definitely. I mean, I think American cuisines, like Southern cuisines, are some of the harder ones to navigate. A lot of Asian cultures obviously have a lot of rice in their diets. The one major ingredient that's tough with Asian cuisines is soy sauce, which again, you know, wasn't traditionally made with wheat, but I don't know if I'm like getting my history right, but I think, you know, around the time of the occupation was when a lot of wheat products found their way into Japanese cooking. It's when you started seeing katsu, which is, you know, kind of a influence from German schnitzel. And so it's a really easy, so soy sauce, now made with wheat, not traditionally so. It's a really easy fix to do at home because you can use gluten-free tamari, which tastes almost identical. It's like a little bit richer, a little bit different than what you taste with soy sauce, but it's delicious. It's perfectly, you can substitute it like as for anything with soy sauce, and therefore can eat pretty much most Japanese, Chinese foods at home, which are really actually very problematic in the restaurants because of the soy sauce, obviously. Although I have found in New York, a lot of higher end sushi places actually do have the soy sauce on hand, but just be careful because anywhere that marinates anything, like you're going to be in soy sauce zone. So, but in terms of, just to finish the ethnic foods question, in terms of other cuisines that are great, as I mentioned, Mexican, a lot of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern food is great. Very few condiments to watch out for. They also tend to be kind of clean, very protein centric. I was in Greece over the summer. It was all fresh fish, potatoes. That was the main starch, so that was great. Middle Eastern, you get a lot of rice again. Moroccan, you have the couscous, which is not gluten-free. It's basically just very small pasta. So you have to be careful of that. But Otherwise, in terms of the dishes themselves and being thickened with flour and all that, you won't have to risk it as much. It's really just Western cuisines. Of course, Irish, French, Italian, those are really the problematic ones. Okay, with the holidays coming up, I'm looking for ideas for gluten-free gravy and sauces. So for gravy in particular, similar to the bechamel, you just need to start with your roux, so with butter or fat and a little bit of flour. So you can use the white rice flour again for that. You can use any sort of AP flour and just continue on with the recipe as per usual. In terms of other sauces, I'm trying to think off the top of my head for the holidays in particular. Yeah, like for a bechamel type thing, that's all you need as a substitution. Most, homemade salad dressings, vinaigrettes are all gluten-free. It's really that where you have to be careful is in all the store-bought versions, because there's tons of additives in them and lots of thickeners that include wheat products. Good bread for a sandwich. So store-bought, again, read the ingredient labels. A lot of them have like 10 plus ingredients on them, which isn't always great. In terms of just like texture and deliciousness, the best I've found is Canyon Bakehouse. They also have like a good whole grain one that has, I think, like millet and chia seeds in it, which is great. Maybe quinoa, I don't know, I can't quite remember. That's my favorite brand. I like Udi's too. I like their whole grain. But in terms of like natural alternatives, one idea using corn is to make arepas at home. Those like keep really well. It's, oh my gosh, I can't remember. It's a Venezuelan sandwich that's made from masa harina, which is lime treated cornmeal. And you basically just combine it 1-to-1 with water. Mix it up, let it sit for a little while till it thickens, just about 10 minutes. Form into little patties, chill it, pan fry it, cut it in half, and you have this amazing kind of corn English muffin to use as a sandwich. Sorry, the question, is that just in NY? What are you referring to? Oh, arepas? No, arepas you can make. Oh, Canyon Bakehouse. I am not sure. I don't think so. You can look it up online. I know we have it in Whole Foods here, so I'm not sure if it's local, but I don't think it is. I don't think it is. Udi's certainly is not. Okay, great. Perfect. Yes, we have it everywhere. Whole Foods everywhere. There are a couple more local brands, but I won't tell you about those because can't have them. But so, okay, in the sandwich front, of course, there is corn tortillas as well. So if you make quesadillas with corn tortillas, delicious. Of course, tacos. I don't know if that can really count as a sandwich. I've not found a gluten-free wrap that I like. So if anyone has any suggestions, would love to hear about that. So I've just been, going with quesadillas over burritos for that. Then, of course, the less fun alternative for burgers is a lettuce wrap, but it does work. I make these Thai chicken burgers with fish sauce in them, which is so delicious, and they're very similar to kind of a Thai fish cake that you get in Vietnam or Thailand, and you traditionally eat those in a lettuce wrap. So and when I work with those flavors, I find it's easier to make the substitution to lettuce or rice and all of that. Let's see what else. I have a couple tricks for pizza. There's this cauliflower crust that has been all the rage on the blogosphere. And you basically pulse cauliflower until it's rice, and then squeeze out all of the moisture, cook it in the microwave, and then bake it in a nice even sheet with like a little cheese in there, and it forms this surprisingly durable crispy crust. It's kind of a lot of work, and like it kind of smells because you're getting your dish towel totally soaked in cauliflower juices. So it's best if you have a washer dryer en suite in your apartment / house. But it does make for a good pizza. Another trick is I like to make soak up as a flatbread. And socca is kind of a northern Italian, southern French dish. You can kind of find it in bakeries in Italy, kind of like a pizza bianca. It's made with just chickpea flour. So it's, again, one of those really easy ones to throw together. You only need one type of flour. And you basically heat a skillet in the oven till it's nice and hot. Pour in the batter. It's very thin, like a crepe batter. And stick it in the oven, and it firms up. And then you can kind of put whatever topping you like and cut it into wedges like you would a pizza or a flatbread. So that's a fun one that I like. And you don't even have to put any toppings on it. It's so delicious just on its own. The first time I had it, it was served alongside just some ricotta cheese for topping, some delicious fresh ricotta. And that's kind of how they eat it in Italy. But I found it's like a good pizza alternative, so that you don't have to buy a store-bought crust or make your own, which of course you can, but you do need, you know, kind of a mix of different flours in order to achieve that. Yeah, so in order to make socca, it's just, it's literally just water, salt, olive oil, and chickpea flour. And one of the keys with most gluten-free flours is that you need to let it thicken and develop a little bit more than obviously a flour that has gluten in it, which again, you know, gives things that elasticity in body. So always, whenever I'm doing crepes, pancakes, anything, always let it sit for at least 20 minutes. So that's like a nice little trick. And you'll see like the texture does develop a bit. It thickens. You'll find a little bit more body there. This batter is very thin though. It's like a crepe batter. So you pour it in and you can twirl the pan, get that nice thin coating, which is why it's nice too, because gluten-free doughs don't have that elasticity. For pizza in particular, it can be hard to make like a nice thin crust. So using this kind of crepe batter is a nice little cheat. We have 4 more minutes left, so if anyone has any burning questions, feel free to add them in, but I'll just keep going through some of my tricks. So one of the ones that I recently, oh, what about dessert? Okay, cakes and pies. Yeah, pumpkin, so any pie is fine with a gluten-free crust. Be careful because sometimes when you're doing like a berry pie, recipes will instruct you to toss the berries with a little bit of flour just so that they thicken as they bake. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's also not necessary, so you don't have to do that with gluten-free flour. You can just leave it be. So one of my favorite crusts to make, I just did it with a lemon tart, is just a really simple almond flour crust. That's probably, you know, if I were to give you my 5 gluten-free flours that I use the most, it would be white rice flour, chickpea flour, almond flour, and then like buckwheat is up there, and then just like miscellaneous, either polenta, cornmeal, not as much corn flour, but you know, one of the corn ones, masa harina, those are kind of my top. So other types of gluten-free crusts, I did a cheesecake recently that is just kind of a simple nut crust. So you just grind up, you can actually do it with almonds or any other nut you like, kind of combine it with a little bit of sugar, a little bit of butter, bake it until it's crusty. And that's great for, yeah, a cheesecake or anything that you don't have to, you know, have real sturdy sides that stand on their own. But because, you know, pie crusts don't really rise, that's a really easy one to replace, you know, a store-bought AP flour, gluten-free flour for regular, and just do it with a little butter or lard or shortening, whatever you use for your normal pie crusts. In terms of other desserts, just to take us to the finish line, some of the naturally gluten-free ones that I love is panna cotta. You can do infinite variations on that. You can also make it dairy-free as well with coconut milk or almond milk. It's a really great healthy go-to. Great for making ahead because you can just chill it in the fridge. And then budino, which is kind of an Italian pudding, but any sort of pudding. Really easy to make gluten-free at home, but you do have to be careful when you buy it store-bought that there's no filler in there and thickener in the form of flour. Let's see, flourless chocolate cake is of course great. I use a recipe that just calls for a tablespoon of flour, so I've been replacing it with cocoa powder over the years, or you can really use like any type of gluten-free flour that you have on hand. Polenta cake, so using the cornmeal again, is a great way to do, you know, more of a grainy cake. I ate a delicious one in London the other day from Ottolenghi, who has those great cookbooks. I'm sure the recipe's in one of his books. And yeah, for desserts, that's pretty much it. Loving chia pudding these days. Very healthy, very delicious. But pâte de crèmes, crème brûlée, less healthy, more delicious. Those are all naturally gluten-free. Well, we are at our half-hour mark, so if there are no more questions, thank you for joining. Hope that this was a bit helpful in terms of your gluten-free cooking pursuits. If you have any more questions, feel free to pop over to my site, Feed Me Phoebe. I can field anything in the comments section, or feel free to email me. And of course, I forgot to mention this earlier, but if you want to donate to Feeding America, which is what this chat benefits, and you can click on the green heart and donate now. And thank you very much. All right, take care.